How did we go from that, a warrior eaten up by violence, to that, a protective dad who compensates for the candor of his son? In short, how did we transform the God of War of the past, aging out of breath, and make it the God of War of today, innovative, mastered, and critically acclaimed, to make it survive through the ages, which very few franchises manage to do in reality? The answer is simple: change is needed, and this change is going to be at the heart of the relationship between two people who are literally Kratos and Atreus, but in real life, and it is their story that I will tell you in this first episode of Digital Tales. By the way, don't worry, I'm not spoiling Ragnarok, but will address some sensitive passages of the 2018 God of War because it's necessary. We will start our adventure by discovering the real Kratos. His name is David Jaffe, and he is the one who will bring God of War to life. Before that, he worked on the Twisted Metal series, and you can imagine it by seeing the images, but subtlety is not really his thing. However, he is also a great enthusiast of Greek mythology. He loves it. He knows all this makes him vibrate. In the early 2000s, when the PS2 was experiencing its greatest hours of glory, David fell in love with a saga that he thought had everything covered. The Onimusha saga. Well, former gamers obviously know him, but if that doesn't mean anything to you, know that he's a kind of beat them up in Japan or a samurai killing demons. There is a little Resident Evil side to the use of cameras with still shots and a few rare follow-ups, but what David likes most about Onimusha is that we use myths and legends to make it an action game, and that the action is spectacular with bosses often, or 4 times bigger than our character. They all fill the screen. David thinks it would be super cool to make the same formula, but with a Greek mythology sauce. He pitched the concept to the studio, and off we went. The God of War adventure was launched. He really doesn't do lace after having worked on the very violent car games that his Twisted Metal, he will say that he was inspired for God of War by the movie Clash of the Titans, which had a re-release a few years ago. Basically, it's fights of big mythological creatures, and what he wanted to do was remix all this with heavy metal magazines. Yes, for the subtlety, we'll go over it again, but I warned you about David. It's the raw dose of violence of the saga, and it fits well with Kratos, which means strength or power in ancient Greek. And there you have it! You have learned Greek today! He's going to have a lot of inspiration to design the game with his teams, and the thing that will turn everyone around with a controller in hand is that you experience the action as closely as possible. In fact, as the good big bully that he is, David will have a frankly stylish idea. Propose 2 game systems for the action sequences. There are the so-called macro phases, where you play in the classic way, attack, move, dodge, and then there are the micro phases, where the camera will zoom in on a scripted action or event, and the player will then have to perform a series of combos to succeed. It's this cinematographic side that will particularly please and offer players visceral sequences where we really feel the destructive power of Kratos. Of course, there is a story in the background and even platform puzzles and everything, but what we will remember from this first game when it was released in 2005 is that it is of an incredible violence and a flawless mastery. It's a 94% on Metacritic. The legend is born, and David Jaffe, our real-life Kratos, he succeeded. So you may ask, but when does our little Atreus, his disciples, arrive? And well, he arrives at this precise moment. God of War is an immediate success, and PlayStation thinks that such a nugget should not be missed. So they immediately start working on God of War 2, which anyway had been woven at the end of the credits, like Kratos will return. Everything is going smoothly except for one thing, which is David Jaffe, the iconic creator of the franchise. He changed jobs and went from game director to creative director. To replace him, Cory Barlog, the head of the animators of the previous game, takes his place at the helm of this sequel. And I know that everyone screws up, but they say Barlog. It's not Balrog, and so it is he, the Atreus of our story, the disciple who by his malice will change everything. He says it in the opening of the making of God of War 2018, Change is Possible. And you'll see why, but for now, Atreus, he's learning. He has been modeled by David Jaffe, his own Kratos, and he recites his lesson. For him, God of War 2 is not even a sequel, it's an extension of the first game. And it's a structure that we'll find later in 2018 and 2022, you'll see why. We're not going to talk about the opus. Corey is doing a great job with her teams. The game takes 93% on Metacritic, and David can see that his baby is in good hands, so he sneaks sail at the end of development. God of War 2 in 2007 was a success. Kratos was satisfied. Atreus rose to prominence and established himself as the new God of War on the franchise. Everything is going well, and very quickly we weave a conclusion to the saga, a God of War 3 on which nothing will go as planned. Well, David Jaffe, as we said, he's a guy who loves everything that makes broom broom and explodes, and that's why after working on the first 2 episodes of Kratos' adventures, he's going to go back to making car games, which won't really work out for him, and it's a shame. He released Calling All Cars in 2007, a project on which he worked very little, and which only went up to 74% on Metacritic, a far cry from his 2 previous global successes. Later, he will come back to his Saga of Heart, the Twisted Metal of 2012, and there too it's a 76% on Metacritic. Would good old Kratos have been better off staying on his license? It's possible, but in the meantime, on the side of Atreus, Cory Barlog, the animator turned game director, things are not better. After the success of God of War 2, Cory had announced a 3rd and final opus that would conclude the saga. And after working on it for 8 months, our God of War simply decided to leave. He leaves the teams in the lurch, so they put the lead artist in charge of the environments, Stig Asmussen, in a hurry to make sure that everything holds together well, because it's still the last part of the trilogy, it's the conclusion of the saga, and it's the first game of the series to land on PS3 as well. So let's just say that you can't miss it. The stakes are colossal for the studio, for the team, and for Sony. And the result, released in 2010, it is downright stylish. In fact, the game explodes 92% on Metacritic, which makes the trilogy one of the best rated in the history of video games. A feat over 5 years, especially with 3 different directing sheets going on the baby. Well, by the way, I see you coming. You can tell yourself that Kratos and Atreus were not the best to leave the teams in the lurch for the conclusion of the trilogy, but actually no, they were in regular contact with Stig Asmussen during the development of God of War 3, and they even helped him get some ideas. Still, David Jaffe is gone. Cory is gone in the middle of development, and well, the series is a bit in a muddy state after such an epic conclusion. She will attempt an unencrypted comeback with God of War Ascension in 2013, but the ratings are much worse. We go to 80% of Metacritic. It's a brand new team that is at the helm, and the misstep for the Golden franchise leaves the studio perplexed. Wouldn't it be time to let the franchise die a beautiful death? After all, it's 2013, the bachelor's degree at 8 years old, it's a good life already. So let's abandon it and move on. And well, a reversal of the situation, there is Atreus who comes back to the studio and says that, guys, I have an idea! Cory Barlog, since he left his team stranded on God of War 3, has traveled through the 9 realms of video games. In 2008, for example, he went to work with the director of the Mad Max films, George Miller, for a video game adaptation of the franchise, a rather big thing, but which will never see the light of day. But still, Cory, like Atreus, has learned a lot from this new mentor. In particular, he understood that you can make very boorish characters and still make them endearing through their actions and their relationship with others. It's really on what we call characterization that he will train there with Miller on this Mad Max project. But as you know, this project will not come to fruition. There will be a Mad Max game in 2015, but it has nothing to do with it. Faced with this great failure from which he still learns a lot of lessons, Cory will go to work on a big project, a monumental thing called Tomb Raider. Well, I'll make it short, but it's a super interesting case. It's a reboot of an aging saga that had wrung out its concept. And well, to bring it back to the forefront of the scene, everything has to be changed. And changing everything on an action-adventure game where you play as a treasure hunter obviously involves making the action more cinematic and finding the right balance between the staging and the playable action. And that's the enlightenment in Cory's head. That's what is needed for God of War to bring the license back to the forefront. It has to make the whole thing more cinematic. Abandon the fixed shot camera system that dates back to 2005 and modernize all that. And then with what he learned with Miller on Mad Max, he knows we can make this big Kratos brute a very endearing character. You just have to put it in a particular context. Corey has been a dad for not long, and he can see that parenthood changes you a man. On top of that, we're in the mid-2010s, and The Last of Us proved that the old grumpy daddy with a child to protect, it's a gold mine. God of War players who grew up with the license are old enough to be parents, so it's going to totally speak to them if we talk about it. It's surprising effective. It rallies several populations of players, and it allows you to make a table race of the past to bring renewal. The recipe is all found, and God of War 2018 is starting work in Cory Barlog's head. But when he comes back to the studio proudly after abandoning his teams, there are a couple of things that will get in the way. So why have I been comparing David Jaffe to Kratos and Cory Barlog to Atreus since just now? If you've made the 2018 game, you can already understand. Cory, his thing is surprise. He is the god of mischief, discord, and illusions, and literally it fits Cory like a glove. And for this great return of God of War, he wants to change everything. People say the saga is dead, so we're going to prove to them that they are wrong. Like Atreus fighting against fate, Cory will infuse his teams, now reconquered, with rather bold ideas for the saga. The very concept of the father-son relationship, well, not many people believed in the team. Same for the change of mythology. For a long time, it was a question of working on Egyptian and Norse mythology and then choosing which one has the most potential. And by the way, maybe the next games will be in Egypt now that Kratos has washed the Nordics, but let's get back to the point. So Cory, he has a lot of ideas for this sequel, the sequence shot for the narration, something that understood him while working on the reboot of Tomb Raider, and the densification of Kratos' character, something he learned with the George Miller on Mad Max. But obviously all these new ideas at Sony Santa Monica, they block a lot of people. The 300 employees who are there like Spartans are asked to face an armada of problems and challenges, and their own Leonidas, he had packed his bags a few years ago because laziness, we mustn't forget it. So seeing him take everyone on a mess of astronomical dimensions, it can be scary. The technical challenge is significant, and the development is long. They started working on it in 2014, and when they revealed the project in 2016 at E3 after the Conference Symphony Orchestra played the new theme composed by Bear McCreary, well, frankly, it's awesome. We all remember that phenomenal teaser when little Atreus goes to get his father and Kratos comes out of the shadows with Gandalf's big beard. Grandiose. And the thing is, as the god of mischief that he is, Cory will stop surprising the players, because a few seconds later, you're already in the game without transition, camera on your shoulder, and what is our weapon? Are they the blades of chaos? Well, no, it's an axe. So the gameplay is slower. Will it stay like that throughout the game? Is it another Kratos from another dimension, or is it the one we have already controlled during the whole saga? Cory puts tons of surprises throughout her story until the end of the game, which puts us on the trail of Ragnarok. The success of the teams is total. It's a 94% on Metacritic at the release in 2018, and Cory is in tears in front of the camera to thank the fans of the franchise and the teams who have trusted him. He learned alongside his own Kratos David, and he managed to stand on his own 2 feet to change the game, change the codes, and give back some fresh blood to the franchise. And today, he is the Kratos of the saga, and for the rest of the saga, he will repeat what he has learned, namely to pass the torch, because yes, he's not the one running this God of War Ragnarok, it's someone else, a new disciple, Eric Williams. And the result is there under the good advice of Cory Williams, and the teams have made not a sequel, but an ultra-effective extension of the game released in 2018. Everything is pushed to the maximum by following to the letter the philosophy of game design driven 4 years earlier by Cory Barlog. Meanwhile, Atreus, now Kratos, can focus on projects that have not yet been announced, and therefore probably on the sequel to God of War in a completely different mythology, and which will bring the license to another generation of machines, namely the PS5. The bar is high, the expectations are there, and like we say, wait and see. That's what we could say about the metamorphosis of the God of War saga and how Kratos and Atreus from the real world passed the torch, perpetuating the legacy of the franchise while changing its essence. Thanks to those who made it this far. Don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss the next episodes.